This is the second official Story Slam I've ever done, and this is the second time I've been number one. Yes. I was at my son's IEP meeting this week, and the teacher mentioned something called the invisible backpack, which seems pretty simple and self-explanatory. We all carry something around with us. Nobody knows the intimate forces that shape each of our lives, and this is a story about what I refer to as the perfect storm, which is in large part why I have become who I am. When I was 9 years old, in the spring, my mom announced to me that it was time to go bra shopping. At 9, I already had breasts. I was a freaking Amazon, seriously. By 5th grade, I was 5'7", 36C, and 135 pounds. I looked like I was 16. So my mom was pregnant at the time, and she gave birth to my sister in June. And I had started getting some sexual attention at school. There was one boy who had a crush on me, and he threw a rock at me at recess and cut my eye, and I had to wear an eye patch for a week. And then there was this girl who was part of this tough girl gang who came up to me and was like, "What are you doing wearing a bra? You're too young for that." And she was so mean, and I was completely humiliated. So I was already aware that there was something going on. But that summer after my sister was born, we went to visit some friends, and their 14-year-old son took my brother and I down to this frog pond on their property, and that was the first time I was sexually assaulted. And I realized that I wasn't safe in my body. And immediately following that, the next month, I didn't tell anybody. We found out that my sister was extremely ill, and within a month after that, we found out that she was terminally ill. So she was 3 months old, and our lives were turned upside down. So my sister died at the age of 14 months old, and what really broke me was not necessarily her death, but that time spent living with a terminally ill sibling who I loved so deeply and always held on to that tiny ray of hope that possibly she could live. The other part of that was that my sister's death was unnecessary. It was caused by malpractice, which was caused by essentially the dynamics between doctors and nurses in the hierarchical don't tell me what to do kind of thing, because my mother, the doctor who was responsible, my mother had been his she was an RN, and he had been her boss, essentially. And anyway, the way it played out, they told us a month later that if, in fact, we had had something done at the time when my mom first noticed there was something wrong with her, that she would have had a full life. So there was that anger around my mom having been silenced by him, told that it was her fault that my sister's health was bad because she was too overprotective and she was too stressed and she was doing it. It was her fault. And as a child, hearing all of this, I didn't know what to do with all of that anger. After my sister died, we moved to Cape Cod full time. My dad was from here. My first day at school, I walked in and I dropped my pencil as I walked into my math class, and a whole bunch of people snickered, and I was told that they could see down my shirt. Now, I immediately, within a matter of 24 hours, became the girl with the big boobs at Nauset Regional Middle School. My nickname was Knockers Knowles. People would walk down the hallway and shout, "Hey, Jugs! Dolly!" Guys would come up to me and go, "Ebenezer, titty squeezer." Or they'd walk up and they'd go, "Come in, Tokyo." And I'm not kidding that this happened on almost a daily basis. manually molested in the hallways. I know that teachers had to see this happening, but you know what? It was funny. There wasn't anyone who said, like, I think there's something wrong with this. And that behavior continued. So here I was, having come from this, my sister's death, to moving to Cape Cod. And I was so humiliated by these experiences that even though I felt strong in my body and strong in myself and talented and smart and all of those things, all of a sudden I felt reduced to like damaged goods. I felt creepy. I felt like I wanted to walk around like this all the time. I felt like a target. I didn't feel safe anywhere I went. My experiences after this perfect storm of events continued through high school. My first boyfriend, the boy I lost my virginity to, actually wooed me for 2 months, worked it so hard, made me so psychologically sure that he was the one, that he was going to love, that I was so special, and then broke up with me the next day. And within a week, I had learned that members of the football team were all planning this. They knew who the virgins were, and he scored points for doing that. It was a game to him. As an adult, I've become a gender violence activist. I'm a human trafficking activist. I understand the con. I understand the disingenuous behavior. I'm angry. I'm really angry. Sometimes I don't know what to do with that anger. But that's what propels me to stand here before you and say, these things happen, and it's not because I want to tell you a war story or say I'm different or I'm somehow special or unique. The worst part of it is that I'm not unique. Whenever I share any piece of these stories, there is no one in the room that somehow does not empathize with me. You can probably, all of you, still remember that girl, maybe even her name, who was the one with the big boobs when you were in middle school. I was a target. I continued to be targeted sexually throughout my entire young adult life. And now that I am 50 years old, even though through all of that, I never told anyone, I finally have found my own voice. And I know that through telling this story, I can reach people, and my own daughter is 11 years old. I am so afraid for her. I know that that's why all of this is coming up so strongly right now. And I know that I am especially suited to help her through this. And I hope that I can, because the world has become a very scary and disheartening place on many levels. And I still don't feel safe. And I want my children to have a voice, and I will teach them how through my own example. So thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Christine Johnson, but Christine wasn't the name that I was given at birth. It was Jane. I was adopted when I was 5 months old in New Jersey by my 2 wonderful parents, and I was raised in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., along with my sister Katie. We both knew that we were adopted from a very early age, but we never really had a desire to find out who our biological parents were. I was 20 the first time I came to Cape Cod. I came to visit a very good friend of mine, and she was living and working here for the summer, and I fell in love. I loved the people. I thought it was so naturally beautiful. I loved the fact you can't take a bad picture here, and that they gave out dog biscuits at the bank drive-up window. So I thought that was great, and it felt so familiar and comfortable to me. And one of the people that I met that summer was named Pat, and I want you to remember her name because I'm going to come back to it later in the story. Okay, in the late 1990s, I was living in Houston, Texas with my wonderful husband and my 2 then adorable children. And we continued to come to Cape Cod because Rob's family was from here, and his parents actually lived in Hyannis at the time. So we continued to visit and vacation here and love it. Around this time, I decided that I wanted to revisit the whole adoption thing. And so I contacted Catholic Charities. I wanted to know who my children looked like on my side of the family, and my parents had both passed, and so I thought the time was right. So I contact Catholic Charities, and I asked them, please do a non-identifying search for my mother, and also reach out to her and see maybe if she would be open to getting in touch with me. I knew Catholic guilt was a very, very powerful force, but in my case, I guess it was even stronger than I thought it was. Not only did she not want to have contact, but she actually had her sister write the letter back to Catholic Charities. So for 10 years, I decided I wasn't going to revisit this, and then finally I couldn't not go there anymore. Nobody was getting any younger, and I thought, I haven't looked for my father. Maybe she's changed her mind, and maybe her sister never even showed her the letter from Catholic Charities. By this time, the internet was pretty robust, and so I could do the search myself. So long story short, it was quite an obsession, but I found out I wasn't a New Jersey girl. I was from Massachusetts. Both sides of my family had been here for generations, and my parents had met at Stonehill College. They dated for 3 years, and right before my mother graduated, she must have realized she was pregnant with me. So my father lived his entire adult life in Falmouth, and my mother waitressed here in the summers when she was in college. I never was able to get in touch with my father. He was very sick by the time I found him, and my mother hadn't changed her mind. But my father's sister, Eleanor, was very, very kind to me, and she told me all about the big, messy, complicated Owens family from Brockton, Mass. And she suggested that I get in touch with her nephew, Jack, who was my first cousin. He was the, quote, family historian, and she suggested that I get in touch with him, and he would be able to fill me in on many details about the family. So I looked him up on the internet, and it turns out that he was a journalist on Cape Cod, and I looked him up. I saw a picture of him, but I guess I just must have lost my nerve at that point in time and never got in touch with him. Okay, so now we're up to the summer of 2016. By this time, my husband and I had bought a house here, and I was there last summer. And one morning, I was looking at Facebook, and remember Pat, like I asked you to? She was a Facebook friend of mine, and I noticed that Pat had liked a comment by someone named Jack, same last name as my cousin, and I look at the picture and I realize it's definitely him. So I saw Pat a couple of days later, and I asked her how she knew Jack, and she just looked completely shocked. I mean, how would I know Jack from the Cape? And she tells me that back when I met her in the early 1980s, she was living with Susan, Eleanor, my aunt's daughter, at Northeastern. She knew my entire father's family. She had gone to the Beacon Hotel in Boston. My father's brother was a bartender there. She'd had drinks there. She was living with Susan. She knew Jack. And she even, Pat is a nurse, and she even took care of Eleanor and her sister Betsy, Jack's mother, when they were both sick with cancer. It was just an unbelievable coincidence, and all these years that I had spent going back and forth across the bridge to the Cape, my father's whole family was right here. So that night, I sent a private message to Jack on Facebook, and 2 nights later, I was having dinner with he and his wife and daughter at, of course, the Hearth and Kettle. And we talked for hours, and I'd have to give Jack's wife and daughter an A for patience because we did talk. He was the first relative that I'd ever met, and, you know, other than my children, the first person I'd met I was related to. So it was pretty momentous for me. And turns out Jack is an avid runner like I am, and I'm hoping to see him this weekend at the Race for the Pint, and which is why I'm even here tonight, because it just so happens that the media center was sponsoring that race, and here I am. Anyway, so that's my lost and found story. I guess you could say I was lost in not knowing who my family was or where I came from or who my people were. And then it turns out that I found the answers to almost all the questions that I was looking for right here on Cape Cod, the place I'd always loved. So thank you very much.
Hi, this is the first time I've done this, so welcome. So I'm going to like to tell a story about a house and a home. I'm an architect, so that's sort of something that I like to think a lot about. My grandparents built a house along the Rhode Island coast in 1950. My grandfather, like every good Azorean, bought a set of plans that were designed for some neighborhood that was inland. Didn't reference the view at all, and he built this house right along the waterfront. We moved into the house after my grandmother had some surgery. We were supposed to temporarily live there during the summers, so our family of 6 moved into the attic. We made it into 3 bedrooms, 1 small bathroom, and there was this random stove that was put in the hallway because someday there was also going to be a kitchenette. If you knew my grandfather, you'd understand why, because he believed that no 2 women should be in the same kitchen. The stove stayed there, unplugged, sitting in the hallway until well after I was 40 years old when I finally moved it into a rental apartment that I had. The apartments were furnished with random furniture. My grandfather owned a furniture store in Rhode Island, and so we had some antique furniture that was daintily set onto these carpets. The carpets were remnants from his store, and they were unrolled, but they didn't quite fit in the room, so there was this big coil of carpet that was against the wall. It was always going to be trimmed, but it never got trimmed. When my grandparents passed away, my sister, my youngest sister, bought the house as part of their estate, and we decided to make it into her family's summer home. So we painstakingly restored the house. It's important to know that over these years, my parents had bought the house next door, so my mother now owned her own home that was adjacent to the house that she and I had grown up in our summers. It was very important to us that we kept the memories of the house, but it was definitely a restoration. The fireplace stayed in the same place, the stairway stayed in the same place, the foundation remained. The foundation of this house, you must know, was actually, although it was built in 1950, we realized through analyzing it through the current building code that it was built to within a fraction of the inch of the requirements for the current flood zone requirements. Truly, only an Azorean could do something like that. Foundation stayed. My mother each day would call me and say things like, "Did you remember to put in the outdoor outlets? I can't find them anywhere." And I'd say, "Mom, I'm an architect. I got this under control." And then she would say one day, "There's plywood over all the windows facing the water. Did you remember to put in windows facing the water? Because your grandfather didn't do that, and there's a view." I'd say, "Mom, it's okay. We got it." We made sure that we kept all the spots in the basement where the gardening tools hung from the rafters, just like my grandfather had, and they stay there now. And I know that we were successful in the renovation when my mother called me one day and she said, "You know, I see what you mean. You can see the old house in the new house. If you knew the old house, when you walk into the new one, you can feel that the old one was there." And then she cried.
In my early 30s, I was stuck in a job that was killing me. So I decided to start my own business so that I could quit that job. And that business failed, as happens when you impulsively start your own business for all the wrong reasons. So I did what you do when you're completely out of options. I got a job selling cars. Most people view buying a car as a really huge pain in the ass, when actually selling a car is a much bigger pain in the ass. When someone would sit down with me, and they didn't trust me, and many times they didn't even like me, because that's the rule. But they'd sit down and tell me what the internet told them they were supposed to pay for a car. And, it doesn't include, what their number didn't include taxes and title and that destination thing where if you could buy a car directly from the factory, you wouldn't need to pay destination, but you can't, so you have to pay it. Didn't matter. I knew I'd lost, and that type of customer was on their way to a passionless relationship with a Camry. Selling cars is really hard. Where I worked, you had to sell 10 cars to make bonus, which is the only way you can make a living. Selling fewer than 10 cars is like working for free. And my boss loved to tell everybody I was his favorite 8-car guy. And it's just really hard. As winter turned to spring on the car lot, it was about 6 months in, I started to get really antsy. My career before selling cars was all about growing stuff. I worked on farms and landscaping, garden centers, that type of thing. People like me have an internal clock. When the growing season nears, we are drawn to the garden. And it was getting really hard for me to be working on automobile-covered blacktop all the time. So I decided I was going to plant a flipping flower garden in the front of this car dealership. And I went to my boss, the owner, and I got him to give me the money, and I went to the garden center, bought a bunch of plants, came in on my day off and got to work. Marguerite daisies, petunias, angelonia, verbena, strobilanthus for, contrast and structure. And this garden was on point. My coworkers, the other salespeople, accused me of sucking up to ownership and losing my mind, and I can say for sure that both of those things were accurate. I had to do it. The worst torture for me selling cars was the night shift. As one of the other salespeople put it, it's like doing time. People do not come to shop for cars after 6 o'clock, but the dealership's open because they're not paying you anything. What you had during that time, you had all the time you needed to think about it. And for me, it was all the impulsive decisions that I had made to get me to that showroom. One of the advantages of being the guy that planted the flowers was, ownership would give you customers that were more appropriate for a guy like me, like yoga teachers and various spiritual types. The problem there was those people loved their life, and I really wanted to love my life the way they did, and that wasn't going to happen for me selling cars. I needed to get back to growing stuff. And eventually, after a year, I did get that call from a local nonprofit that offered me a job managing their farm. And after I made sure that it wasn't another salesperson completely fucking with me, I promptly accepted the job. On my last day, as I'm walking out the showroom door, and the last time I'm leaving the showroom, and the youngest salesperson on the floor, John, he came running out after me, and he yelled, "James, hey man, can I call you if I have a question about the flowers?" I turned around, I gave him a big hug, and I said, "Yeah, man, call me about the flowers. Thanks."
Hello, it's my first time doing this. My name's Katri Mullally, and here's my story. So you've seen those boxes at the schools and the community centers, those lost and found boxes. They're usually filled to the brim with somebody's coat, one sneaker, maybe a stationery book, pair of glasses, all that stuff. I've seen plenty of them in my time, had a couple kids in school. It boggles my mind, though, why those boxes never seem to go down. Like, everybody finds the things, but nobody comes back to pick them up. If it was me and my kid lost his coat at school, that's the first place I would look, because I'm not going to go buy him a new coat if there's like 45 still sitting in the box. So lost and found boxes, great thing. It's not something that I really use, though, in my own life. I've been pretty good at keeping track of my stuff. Yeah, I might misplace things now and then, and it happens more often now that I'm going to be 55, however old I'm going to be this summer. So I might misplace things now and then, but I'm usually able to figure out where I left it, retrace my steps, and I'll find it in a day or two. Maybe sometimes it takes me a little bit longer, so maybe it was technically lost, but anyways, I'm pretty good at keeping control of my stuff and organized. But the things that I have lost are people. I've lost a lot of very dear people in my life, people that, meant a lot to me and helped me grow as a person. And, so I lost my mother in March of 2015. I lost my dad in February of 2002 on his wedding anniversary. And I don't like that term lost when we talk about death. I mean, we didn't really lose them, literally. I mean, even if I did find them, it's not how I remember them, right? And they're not lost. They lost, their life ended. It's the human condition. We were born, we live, and we die. So the word lost always kind of bugs me a little bit when we talk about death. And so I wonder if us as human beings, we use that word lost because maybe we're trying to soften the news when we tell somebody that I lost my mother instead of saying my mother died. I mean, died does sound a little more harsh than lost, or maybe we say lost because we think that we will find something again after that loss. But what I believe is that when we say lost, what really happens is we lose ourselves. We lose who we are a little bit because that person's no longer in our life. It happened to me in 1997. I lost myself. After my sister was killed by her boyfriend at the time. She was 31 years old. Never did I think I would ever have to live through something like that, let alone call my parents in Connecticut and let them know what happened. And I can tell you that they caught him, they tried him, he's in jail for life. But it changed my life, and I was lost for quite a few years after that. I had all the symptoms of being lost, disoriented. I quit my job, I cashed in my retirement, I questioned life, I questioned the purpose of my own life. Why was it her and not me? I mean, so many things. People who knew me back then, I wasn't the real Khatri. So I lost myself, and I tried to find myself, tried to get myself back on that path and get unlost. I looked to relationships to help me. I looked to the cemetery. I would go to church, talk to pastor, talk to my family the best I could because some of my family couldn't really talk about the fact that Elsie was gone. I also looked in the bottle, didn't matter what kind of flavor, just as long as it was alcoholic, and I tried really hard. After many years of therapy, and I really mean many, it's taken me a long time, many years of therapy, ultimately getting sober, talking to more people, doing some inner work, being fair to myself, I finally found the path back to myself. I was able to realize that through Elsie's death, I gained peace somehow. I don't know how to explain it, and maybe somebody in the audience can relate to what I'm saying. It was a horrible tragedy. It made me a stronger person, though. It helped me renew my vision of what life was about. I spent more time looking at the little things. You know how we all say you got to take time to smell the flowers. Well, I did. I literally would go, I got to go smell that flower because I might not be here tomorrow. I spent time with my family. I thought about how I was behaving and how I was affecting other people's lives. I thought about positive things, even in the midst of so many negative things in our life, in the world. And I realized that through the sadness of my heart, I was still able to find peace and joy and love in the world. It's been a long road to get there, but I believe that when people pass on, that it is possible to find things in our life that make a difference. For me, it was that renewed sense of spirit, a sense of self-esteem, and peace, love, and hope. And yes, I mean hope, because I once was lost, and now I'm found.
This is actually my first time telling a story, so please bear with me. I recently spent a month in Cuba learning salsa dancing, Spanish, working on a photojournalism project about Cuban women, and falling in love with a dog. She was a small, brown, doe-eyed street dog whom I met one day while doing my intranet at a local public internet park, of which there are many, many in Havana. She came up to me and I sort of petted her head, and then she turned upside down and I rubbed her belly, and she seemed to go into a sort of blissful state. And didn't think much of it because there's so many street dogs in Havana. But lo and behold, over the next few days, every single day when I came home from my classes, she would find me. And I went to very many different internet parks and cafes, and somehow she'd always come up to me and sit by my feet and wait for her little snuggle. Ocho, who I named after my partner Mark and my lucky number, seemed to have decided that I was her human. And quite honestly, after a couple weeks, I believed I was. And I took her home, I gave her a bath, I gave her some dinner, and that night we snuggled together all night. And after that, we were pretty much inseparable. We went to restaurants together, we went on long walks in our neighborhood, we rode buses together, and of course, we slept in the same bed every night, and she was always pressed up tightly to me for warmth. Of course, I quickly realized, oh my goodness, I have to take this dog back to the US with me, back to Cape Cod, because how could I not? And so I started looking into the process, and of course, it's not easy to bring a dog back from Cuba. So I started the complex process. I took her to a vet, and I started the complex process of preparing her for immigration. I quickly realized that I would not be able to bring her back immediately because the rabies vaccine had to be valid for 30 days before you could actually bring the dog back into the United States. So I found a Cuban family to look after her. The day I took her over to their house was really difficult, and I just kept saying to myself, well, I'm coming back to get Ocho in 3 to 4 weeks, I'll be back to get her. And she was very clingy. And I left her there, and then the next day before I got onto my plane to go back to the States, I called the family. I was like, how did she do? Did she eat? Did she sleep? And they said, actually, she didn't sleep all night, and she sat by the front door waiting for you. I was kind of heartbroken by this image. Sorry. When I came back to the Cape Cod, I anxiously awaited news of Ocho. And I didn't hear anything from the family, and I started getting a little worried. And then after about 6 days, I got a message from them. And my worst fears were realized when they said that she had disappeared, and she'd run away and had disappeared. And I wrote back immediately saying, please, please just keep looking for her, whatever it takes, posters, reward money. And I said, you might want to go back to my old neighborhood to look for her because that's where she used to find me all the time. So I know that dogs have an amazing sense of direction because I have a dog here on Cape Cod who's navigated his way over crazy distances. So at the same time, she was about an hour away from my neighborhood. And she's also only 7 months old. She was a mere puppy. On top of it, we had taken a bus there, and there's crazy traffic in Havana, and I just couldn't imagine this tiny little puppy navigating her way all this distance. But I was hopeful, and the next morning I woke up. It was actually my birthday, and I felt so despondent, and lo and behold, I turned my phone on, and there's a message from the family saying they had found her. She was at a restaurant, curled up in a little ball next to the table where I used to sit and do my email. Sorry. Anyway, it was amazing. It was a miracle. I was so happy. I knew it was the best birthday present I could ever have received. And I immediately bought my plane ticket to go back to Cuba. I ordered her leash, her collar, her little Ocho tag, and was just so excited. I started counting the days till I'd see her again. Unfortunately, life does not necessarily unfold the way one wants it to. And about a week later, I got a message from the family. I was driving along and I saw a message saying, I just saw the words, Ocho, bad, sad news, and died. I pulled into a parking lot, the first parking lot I could find, to read the message, and found myself crying over my steering wheel for the next hour. I'm still not sure exactly how it happened, but apparently she died of pulmonary failure in the arms of the woman who was looking after her at a local state-run clinic while waiting for treatment. It was such a painful image, and I couldn't understand how this healthy, happy, sweet little dog that I'd so fallen in love with and who I developed such a powerful connection with could no longer be alive. I spent the next few days really doing a lot of soul searching, trying to find ways of channeling my grief into something positive. One day I was scanning the internet for hope, and lo and behold, I see this little dog looking back at me, little brown dog with doe-like eyes, and I immediately thought that, it struck me how much she looked like Ocho. And I thought, I read the story. She was found on a Puerto Rican beach, almost dead, just a few months before, and she'd been rescued by this organization who'd brought her back to the United States, and she was now in Massachusetts with a family waiting for adoption. It really spoke to me, and I immediately reached out to them. And I started filling out all the application forms. It was like 10 pages. It was like applying for a job for the FBI. All the information and the references, and within a few days we'd arranged to meet. And I spent a couple sleepless nights wondering how she would react to us and us to her, and whether we'd connect with her, because of course I so badly wanted to connect with her. So the day she arrived, she got out of the vehicle with her foster mom, and I just saw her hopeful little eyes and enthusiastically wagging tail. And I knew this was going to be our new family member. It's been about a week now. That's why I'm crying. It's so incredibly new and raw. But it's been about a week now since Ocho Dos has been in our lives. And I can't even begin to describe all the wonderful moments we've had with her. We start and end each day with her lying on her back with her little belly in the air and me rubbing it and her going into a sort of trance-like state. And quite honestly, I'm just astounded by my feelings for her and by the knowledge that without my love for the little Cuban dog, I would not have opened my heart to this Ocho, who perhaps needed to be found even more than the first. Thank you.
In 7th grade, I decided that I looked like a boy. There were some really good reasons for this. It was a way to explain the issues in my life that I didn't think were very good. So in 7th grade, you're 13 generally, and 13 is a really bad year for most girls. I was ADD. Back then, we didn't know what ADD was. And one of the hallmarks of having ADD is your self-esteem is usually in the toilet most of the time, no matter what you do. And so as a 13-year-old girl, when life is hard enough, I had that. And so I would look around and find all the ways that I was inferior to everybody else. Socially was a little difficult. I had trouble relating to kids my own age. I had curly hair that was really not cool. Now remember, I'm talking about growing up in northern Maine in the 70s. So things have changed a bit, but what I'm telling you is what it was like back then. So curly hair was not cool. Getting good grades was not cool. Being tall for my age was not cool. Having acne, not cool. Glasses, not cool. This was pre-braces, so I had these I forgot the name now. Yeah, these little teeth here, were just forward a bit, And so the boys would call me Fang. And they would also call me Poodlehead and sometimes Four Eyes. So I had lots of, reasons to feel really crummy about myself. I also had this nasty little song that my cousin made for me in second grade of all times. And it went like this. Big Shan, ba-da-ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba, Big Shan. And so I had this awful little song that would, go through my brain when I was feeling terrible, and that would help me feel worse. So it was bad, and I had to have a reason to cover this up. I had to have a reason to explain this away. And it did so happen that I had a slender body, although I did not think it was slender, because remember, I was a 13-year-old girl, so it was fat. But I had a very slender body. And I thought, the reason that nothing is working is because I look like a boy. Yeah, that's it. That's it. I look like a boy. So therefore, no boys are going to ask me out because I look like a boy. And girls aren't going to hang around with me because I look like a boy. So it just explains everything. It worked really well. And I held on to that as I grew up. I mean, I even have the wedding pictures to prove it. I'm in this beautiful gown that my mother made, and I'm carrying my flowers like a club. I hung out with men. My best friends were men. I worked with men. I was in the landscape industry, still am. I swore like men. I learned to behave like men, and I even thought about other women like men, and would think about them and their bodies kind of similar to how men did. Because after all, I was a man, sort of, even though I was married. Doesn't make any sense, but that's how it was. So at 38, I was a black belt in karate, and I was working out in a gym. And I saw a poster on the wall featuring this very beautiful woman leaning on one arm, jewelry up and down her arm, beautiful exposed belly with jewelry on it, tight little belly, and I thought, oh, I want to look like her. She is it. But I had to learn how to belly dance to look like her. And that was a little weird because I felt like a man. But okay, I want the belly, I want to look like her, so I will sign up for belly dancing. So I did. And I took one of my husband's T-shirts. He's 6'3", so it fit me like a little dress. And that way I could hide my whole body from all the other women in the class, and I could hide my body from the big mirrors on the wall because I didn't want to look at it because it looked too much like a man. And I remember distinctly, I'm 38 now, I remember distinctly looking around the room at every other woman in the room, all different sizes, different ages, all of them bared, their bellies bared, and me looking at every one of them and thinking, yep, they all look like women. Every one of them look like women. I look like a man. Boy, this is weird. And it was kind of hard for me to learn belly dancing initially because it's very pretty, it's very feminine, and I didn't feel that way. And it was tough, but I stuck with it. 3 months in, my teacher had something called a hafla. And a hafla is a party, it's like a recital. I was too new at belly dancing to be in it, so I was just there as just watching. And sitting there with my kind of, I don't mean to insult any of you men, but, kind of like my sort of man-like thinking. I would look at the women lining up, and I would kind of judge them and think, oh, she's going to go on stage looking like that? Wow, oh, boy, wow, oh, okay. And then she would. And then my reaction was, oh my God, she's beautiful. Wow, she's beautiful. And look at her, she's moving in a way where she's not hung up about her body. She's exposing her belly. She's loving that people are looking at her. I mean, it just amazed me. It actually blew my mind. And as I was sitting there in my little plastic chair watching all this happen, you know, I could feel my brain sort of going like click, 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 click. It's like these gears were moving around. It was like my brain was trying to jump a track, like a train jumping a track. And as I continued to watch this, I was stunned and amazed. And after an hour or so, for the first time in my life, I joined the world of women.
Did you ever go on a trip and not end up where you thought you were going to go? That happened kind of to me. Life takes detours, and well, you ever think about a woman when she's pregnant, and you know she does one thing doesn't happen when she gives birth. She actually produces two things the day the infant is born. She produces the infant, but she also produces a dad. A dad. Now I was 24 when I had cancer. I had testicular cancer, and I had to go into the hospital, and I had the orchiectomy and then the surgery, and they said, well, you're going to have to, bank your sperm because there's a possibility the surgery won't allow you to be fertile. And so, okay, so I kind of did that. And then they said, after that, I had shadows on my lungs again, and I got cancer started to come back after about 3 months of the surgery. And then they said, well, you have to have chemotherapy. And although I'd banked my sperm, and the chemotherapy really knocks you out. It really tears you down. It's a young man's disease. It happens for guys between the ages of 15 and 35. I was 24, a young guy, and it really took the stuffing out of me. I tell you all this, and because it really made my life take a change, a real detour. I didn't know. I left my Fortune 500 company career. I didn't really understand what was happening to me. I guess I got chemo brain, and it really changed my life. But I eventually found a woman who liked the fact that I was not a working model, but a sports model, so that was fine. Without being the possibility of a dad, I kind of looked around, and for the part of my life it wasn't there. And I had my brother eventually was born when I was in my teens, and I remembered that I had experiences of being a dad. I was 14 and my brother was an infant, so I got to hold an infant. I actually had to change his diaper, and I got to feed him his bottle. So I did have experiences of being a dad, and so that kind of really was kind of a replacement. And later, my brother grew up, and I didn't have to worry about preserving the Huttner, the renowned Huttner name, because my brother had 8 kids, and so that kind of took care of that end of things as far as our history. And I also got to see and play with 8 little kids. So, but being an uncle isn't the same as being a dad. My brother had that role, and so I kind of really didn't think about it. I guess I never lost that some sense of myself. But now we're really on a plane ride, and my wife and I are going down to Florida, and we go to the Hub Airport in Atlanta, Georgia, and we get on the plane, and I get to go where there's a crowded plane. It's one of those commuters, it's kind of small, but it's packed to the gills because it's your last connection. And I walk down the aisle, and there's only a couple seats left, and in front of me is this little kid. And I said, oh, well, he's by himself. I get my seat's right next to him. And he's traveling with his mom and his sister and his brother. And they're actually a couple rows back because there's 3 seats together, and he's the 4th. And so I get to have, a parent moment with this little kid. So, hey, this is really nice. I really just kind of soak those moments up. And I had this kid go, while we're waiting for the plane to fill up, the seat next to me is empty. This is a packed plane, and there's nobody in the seat next to me. Actually, because it was so packed, my wife is actually 3 rows in front of me, and I wanted to have her maybe sit next to me, and it would be nice. And the big guy next to her was kind of jammed in there, and she was kind of wedged. I knew it'd be nice to her to come back next to me, but I didn't want to go up and be on the other side of her, because then she'd be sandwiched between the 2 of us. And just at that moment, the last passenger comes down the aisle, running to get to his seat, right next to me. And so, I checked out with this little kid and trying to wave to the mom, I'll watch out for him and whatnot, and had that connection. And this young man sits down next to me. He's maybe in his early 20s. And I go, interesting, here's this older, maybe I got experience. I got one kid and another kid. Kind of like, wow, interesting point in my life. And there was really, this little kid really was kind of squirmy. And about the only thing I could do with it, he's got his plastic toy and his headphones and whatever he's doing. He wants to run back and play with his brother all the time. About the only thing I could do to kind of be a parent is just make sure he's got a seatbelt on. And that's all. And I looked at the other guy, and the guy goes, kids, so I was okay. And the plane takes off, and we get up to cruising height, and you can take your seatbelt off. And, of course, the kid goes off and takes off. Now I've got this other young gentleman next to me. And it took a little while, but we started talking. And here I am, an older man, and I've had a little bit of problems in my life. And I have hopefully some wisdom to share. And this young man tells me about the fact that, his mom's got a stepfather, and he's really leaving his place in Massachusetts to go down be with his grandmom, because he had gone to college down there, and he was out of cycle, so he's going to graduate over the winter. And he had a girlfriend down there he's going back to see, but he was really kind of bummed. You could kind of tell. And so I kind of share him some of the inspirational things that happened in my life, and how I'd gotten over having cancer, and how that kind of been an important part of my search for myself. And he was in that stage in his life where I think he needed to hear those things. He had gone through some kind of accident and was deaf in one ear, and he could relate to my trauma, and he was, he didn't know what he was going to do. He was going to go down and maybe party with his friends, and he didn't know what his girlfriend was going to be doing. But I was able to talk with him for a little while, and I think we really connected, and sharing my story, and how maybe he could use the library to find some inspirational books, and find a new way for himself, and maybe make a connection with the girlfriend, but maybe it won't be the permanent one. But it's good to understand you've got choices. And so I felt we made a connection at the end. When we landed, we cruised into the airport in Florida, and everybody hustles off the plane as, you say goodbye if you have a seatmate. And we kind of looked at each other. I wanted to say more, and I think he did too, but you have to leave. And so we left. And between the getting the plane, after you get out of the terminal and before you go to the baggage area, he caught up with me again. I saw the look in his eye, that he had been transformed. He had been changed from being somebody without direction to having hope, to having a future, and maybe wanting to have a connection. Maybe he saw me as a mentor, maybe not. I don't. But I think I saw the look of the eyes of a son. And the biggest thing this journey gave me that I didn't know I was going to get to was that I really felt, just for a moment, what it was like to be a father.
How many of you women have had natural childbirth? So you know what it's like. We have to breathe, right? Right? And push, right? So those are the words that I heard about 13 years ago. It's like, breathe, Marie, breathe. Push, you know. So at 41 years old, I lost my mind and decided to have natural childbirth. Right? We don't do that. I had 2 children previously, one at 19 and one at 29. So I have 3 children in 3 different decades. You can laugh now, right? So, you know, that was May 5th, 2004. I had a girlfriend from high school, from junior high school, on the left. She's a nurse, an RN, and I had my woman's ministry leader, a young woman, never had children, on my right, but I knew she could sing and I knew she could pray, and I was happy. It was like the most beautiful birth that you could ever imagine, except the pain, of course. So they said, push, Marie, push, breathe. So I did. I pushed, and out he came. The most beautiful baby you ever seen. I looked at him, and I was still in good shape, and I said to myself in my spirit, I said, he has the characteristics of my other children. He looked like a little fat sumo wrestler, really, you know, pale skin, little hair that stuck up. My kids come out with a lot of hair, but something was off. So the doctor came in, she gave the APGAR scores, and she went home. She said, this baby's perfect. You get the 10 or whatever you get, and she put on her coat, and she went home. And within the hour, or maybe even moments later, a nurse came in who had been on shift in Boston at Children's Hospital. She looked at my son and said, get him out of here, get him on oxygen. So that's the beginning of my journey. They whisked him away and called the doctor back in to take a look. Now, I'm an event planner. And as an event planner, everything is a party to me. So I always schedule with the hospital a party. My 19-year-old, I had a party. The 29-year-old, I had a party. And this guy, I was having a party. So I had about 30 people showing up. I had platters already made. This is true. I do this in the hospitals. So here I am looking a mess, you know, natural childbirth. And I have this child who's being whisked off to Children's Hospital. And I wasn't sure why. So the doctor came in and took a closer look, and they said to me they're concerned about Down syndrome. And they told me some of the characteristics of Down syndrome. They said, okay, you'd have a finger or something that would be longer, or a mark in your hand. I was like, okay, my other child had that. They have that. They have that. Largely the people that were coming were people from my church. So, you know, we were going to have a hallelujah good time anyway, right? So we got together, and we had our meals, our food, and we prayed, and they whisked my son off. And, you know, just go back with me a moment. About a year and a half before that, I had finally met my Prince Charming. I had the perfect husband. I had a new house that was being built. I had a husband who worked, he was a Jamaican, little cute guy. He worked around the clock, so he would give me everything that I needed and some of what I wanted. We were happy. We worked together. I branded his business. He was out there. He was doing the Jamaican thing, 5-job man, you know, and I was, you know, 41 years old. I had a beautiful wedding and picket fence, and not really picket fence, but just imagine, right? So azalea bushes, okay. So the nursery, for the first time, when you're 19, you don't plan a nursery. You don't plan the clothing, but this time was different. I had planned the nursery. Everything was painted and beautiful. The drawers were folded nicely. All the church ladies were doting over me. I had a big shower. All of the dreams. This was going to be my doctor, okay? This was my doctor. And I knew that he would be the one that would take care of me. I have 3 sons, by the way. And in about 2 weeks it takes to get the results back, and it came back that he had Down syndrome. Now fast forward with me. I'm in my new doctor's office about a week ago, And we're trying to get to the bottom of why I'm putting on so much weight. How come the weight's pouring back on, right? I had lost 176 pounds, and now I'm back up. And she said, maybe you're grieving the loss of the child that you had lost, right? The hopes that you had lost. And then it dawned on me, after, I'm a woman of faith, and I immediately said, no, couldn't be. And then when this topic of this day, the lost and found, came up, I said, you know what, maybe. Because I had the Prince Charming, the house, the child, he was gonna be my doctor. And then as years went on, he's gonna be 13 now. I get a lot of no's, right? He can't join regular Little League. He can't be in a regular classroom. He's in a substantially separate classroom. So I lost a lot of my hopes and my dreams. That beautifully painted nursery, the yellow with the white crib, and the perfectly folded drawers. They had to wait. I had to wait a month and a half to get his heart surgery and to get home. So let me go back a little bit. When I did come home, the azaleas had bloomed in front of the house, right? So he was born May 5th, and I think it takes a while for those flowers on Cape Cod to bloom. And, you know, all the flowers were blooming at my new house, and things were looking amazing. And I held that baby in my arms, and I began to live. I began to live. In this journey, I did a lot of praying. So what I found was my voice, right? In the hospital, I did a lot of talking to people who said, oh, well, maybe he, you know, will be. They were already casting what they thought my child would be on him as an infant, right? But God was telling me they had more for Chase. So I began to find my voice for advocacy, my voice to write poetry, my voice to take weight off so that I can keep up with Chase. I named him Chase. My mother said, don't do it, right? And I did it anyway, right? She said, you're going to be Chase and Chase. It took about 5 years to chase Chase because children with Down syndrome have low muscle tone. They're floppy. They could be bigger. They're shorter. His speech isn't all that great. But this child is amazing. He knows every word to every live musical, every dance. He plays guitar the best he can. He brings a lot of joy and laughter to the world. I bring him somewhere and people are like, oh, you know, Chase is here. He's like the little mayor of Cape Cod, right? He goes to the Cape Cod YMCA, so kids know him from all over the Cape. So what I found, right, even in the loss was I found myself. I found that I am a champion, that I can get up and I can advocate for the rights of my son, for the rights of others who have disabilities. I can give them a voice. I can give them, you know, the credibility with people like you who may not know what it's like. Today was the hardest day. I spent the whole day. It's April vacation. So I spent the whole day with this child. And he repeats things like cheeseburger, 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 you know. I show. I am not kidding. It's constant, right? Show. So that means he wants to go to a live musical. I show. We've seen about 30 Disney on Ices, right? But it's okay. My husband's retired. He's older, but it's okay. We have found, okay, so I divorced. I lost that old other husband, that Jamaican guy, but he's still in our lives, and he loves his son. And I found this wonderful Irish guy, a retired law enforcement guy, who completely loves this child. He never had children, and with every ounce of his being, he loves Chase. He loves him. And he looks at him as if. So what we found is a wonderful family, an extended family with my ex-husband, with the community. How lucky am I to be sitting with capabilities tonight? That's not an accident. Woo! You know? So in the loss, we can find so much. I have found so much grace, so much love, so much joy. I found my voice. I found my purpose to serve my community, to give back. And to lift Chase up and let people know that, and to show compassion. Thank you.
About 25 years ago, I was expecting a visit from a high school friend. And when she arrived, she had a small paper bag was something soft and flat inside, and I never could have imagined the emotions it would evoke in me. But when I was a little girl, my mom had a big colonial-style chest of drawers, and the top narrow drawer held all kinds of interesting accessories and mementos, and I was allowed to peek in there, and I'd stand on my tiptoes and look at what was in there. Fancy jewelry and scarves. From my grandparents, who were born in the 1800s, my grandmother's tortoiseshell barrette-type comb, my grandfather's cufflinks, my father's medals from World War II, the Bronze Star Medal and his infantry pin, my mom's Red Cross pin from the same war. But the thing that interested me most was an intricately beaded satin purse. I'd never asked, I don't think I ever asked where it came from. I don't know if it was my mother's originally as a young girl or if it belonged to one of my grandmothers. But my sisters took it to their proms in the 1950s and 60s when proms were very, very fancy affairs, and later to their weddings, and later on I took it to my high school proms as well. Then I made a huge mistake. I lent it to a friend. At 17, I lent it to a friend who was going to her prom without asking my mother. Okay, so this purse was about the size of a small dinner plate, covered with absolutely beautiful pearl-like beads, white pearl-like beads, and pink embroidered flowers with a silver clasp and a little handle that was also satin with beaded satin. It was never returned to me. For many years, I asked my friend about it. She insisted she didn't have it, that it wasn't in her mother's home. And all those years, I felt so bad that I had many nieces who were married who weren't able to take it to their wedding and pass the tradition down. Then many years went by, and my friend's mother was selling her house. When the belongings were being packed and sorted, the purse was found. Almost 20 years to the day that I had lost it, my friend arrived at the door with it in this brown paper bag. So I immediately took it out and was so elated, gave it back to my mother. She was thrilled, and she put it right back in that top bureau drawer. A few years later, my mother died, and the purse became mine. I immediately wrapped it in tissue paper, put it in my top bureau drawer where my mementos and special pieces of jewelry and special things are, where it remains today. In the 20 years since my mom died and the purse became mine, I occasionally take it out, roll the beads between my fingers, miss my mom, remember how happy she was when I gave it back to her, and embrace the memory of that little girl who stood on her tiptoes and dreamed about using it so long ago.
So my parents' first house was a little flat in southeast London, and it smelled a little like old cats, and the roof leaked a little bit when it rained, and it had these slopey ceilings in the living room. So when they put the couch in the living room, there was just this small, thin piece of wall behind. And I had this grandmother. She was an amazing woman. She was called Cappers by everyone who knew her. When she became a grandmother, she wanted to be called Captain, as in, "Oh, Captain, my Captain." But that was a little bit much for my sister to handle, so she became Cappers, and Cappers she was, like I said, to everyone. So she was an amateur artist, and she saw this space, and she thought, that needs a painting. I will make a painting for them. So she measured it, and she painted this painting. It's a very, very mellow watercolor. It's a painting of the sea. It's almost monochromatic, and it's long and thin to fit in this space. My grandfather, who very boringly was just called Granddad, although to be fair, he was Little Granddad, not to be confused with Big Granddad, and he built the frame for it, and they brought it to my parents' house and gave it to them as a gift, and there it was on the wall, and it looked beautiful and fit perfectly and was exactly how it was supposed to be. So a couple of years go by, and then my sister arrives, and they move to a bigger house, and they take the painting, and life goes along happily. And then along comes me, and I'm, still becoming me. And my father gets a job offer over here in the States. And so he packs up the family and he packs up all our stuff and he waits for me to arrive, and then he brings us all over to the States and he brings the painting along with us. We moved to a little place in Connecticut on the shore, so it was a perfect place for a painting of the sea. My dad was not a very good dad. And after a couple of years, my mother realized he wasn't really that good of a husband either. And so she left him, and she took my sister and me, and we moved to the other side of the state and left him there. So he tried to make it here, but he decided that America wasn't really for him, and he had a big old yard sale. He sold pretty much everything that he owned, including the painting, and off he flew back to England. So time passes, and I go all the way through school. I go to photography school. I move to the Cape. My sister gets married. She has a baby. And my mom and my stepfather are one day at a friend's house. And they're having dinner, and right in the middle of dinner, my mom jumps up. And, you know, she's a good Brit, so she probably said, "Oh, excuse me, pardon me, I just need to," and goes up and looks at this painting over her friend's mantelpiece. And it turns out that it is indeed her painting. It has my grandmother's signature on the side. And my friend said, "Oh yeah, I just bought that from a tag sale. Do you like it?" And my mom's like, "Oh my gosh, you have no idea." And she told the story how, you know, a decade previously she'd gotten divorced, and, you know, that the painting had been painted for this special place. And so my mom's friend, of course, says, "Well, you have to have the painting." And it being, you know, her and her ex-husband's, she gave it to my sister because she was the older sister, but my sister didn't like it, didn't want it, said, "Give it to Sarah. She lives on the Cape. It's perfect. Send it back to the sea." And so at the time, I was living with this gorgeous curly-haired hippie boy, and along comes this painting that now is, you know, in our little apartment, and we get shared the tale together of how it had been painted and it had been gone and everybody had forgotten about it, and then it just appeared again there on the, you know, right on the wall at my mom's friend's house. So a few months go by and we don't have any money, and we need money for something, probably Grateful Dead tickets or something. And he says, "Well, let's sell the painting." And I say, "What? Are you kidding? We can't sell the painting. It has taken over a decade to make it back to the family. It has traveled over 50 miles. It has so much history. We can't sell the painting." He said to me, "It's perfect. We need to sell the painting." He's like, "We'll sell it. We'll get the money." He's like, "It'll come back. It'll be fine." So I kept the painting. I decided not to trust him, and it still hangs on my wall today.
First of all, the judge